Greetings and welcome, everyone, to the 23rd episode of the Mystery Hour with Con Sweeney at noon Second Life time or 3 p.m. Eastern for you folks in real life. I'm your host, Con Sweeney. Now, to what we're about today. We're a monthly show based here in Second Life. We broadcast live from here on Facebook and YouTube every third Monday of the month at 12 p.m. Second Life time or Pacific time again for you folks in real life. We meet mystery authors and others from the publishing world to talk about books and the issues facing them today from social and technological change. And there's certainly been a lot of those lately. I'd like to thank Draxter Dupre, host of the Second Life Book Club and the Drax Files Radio Hour, both broadcast from Second Life, for his sponsorship and the use of the Book Club Island when we first got started. I'd also like to thank Strawberry Linden and Brett Linden for their help in setting this show up in the beginning. And finally, my eternal thanks to Becky Hansen and Isabel Charon for all their technical assistance in making this happen. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. Now, our regular viewers may notice that we're no longer on Book Club Island. The reason being that it's a lot going on over there these days, and setting up for our show is becoming a bit of an effort, so we decided to set up our own studio. And here we are. Allow me now to introduce today's guest, Nev March, who has written Murder in Old Bombay and Pearl at the Exposition under the pen name Nev March. And also, full disclosure, Nev and I both sit on the board of directors of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America, where I first met her. Both of her books are set in the time period of the Raj, or the British Empire in India. Nev is based here in the States. Welcome, Nev. How does it feel to be in World in Second Life, or as the rest of the world is starting to call it, the metaverse?
It's wonderful. This is a very interesting format indeed.
According to Mark Zuckerberg, we should get used to it. This could be the future. Nev, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey as a writer, what motivated you to write, and what life has been like for you as a writer during the pandemic?
Sure. Goodness, my journey as a writer has been really about discovering faith in my own talent. I've been writing for many, many years. It's the age of 11, actually, short stories, poems, and then, took a long break, really, to raise a family, I've worked as a programmer, I have multiple degrees in economics, pretty much to pay the bills, and, I guess I came back to writing, although when I look back at all these notebooks I seem to have covered, it feels like I never really left. But I started doing it seriously after getting laid off from work in 2015, and just going back to an early passion and finding so much joy in it. But it was really about say 2016 or 17. I started working with a writing group in the library, so a local library, that I realized I still had a lot to learn. There's no question about it. And I started educating myself on the craft of writing, and I think that has really been a game changer for me. After that, I started to see some success. So my first book, Murder in Old Bombay, was published in 2020 as a result of winning the Mystery Writers of America contest for Best First Crime Novel, and that was in 2019. And that came with a contract, and then the following contract succeeded it, sort of launched my career as a writer. But I'm still constantly trying to hone my skills, just be a better writer, and experiment a little bit. Take some risks with structure and with narrative storytelling.
Yes, I've noticed that with your books. Unlike some authors, many authors who write mysteries and thrillers who are very formulaic. Let me see if I got that word out right. I like how you seem to move your action forward. Now, the first book is based in Bombay during the Raj. The next book is set in the United States at the time of the exposition out in Chicago, which many writers, especially for their second novel, are not willing to take that kind of a risk and to jump right into something so different.
Yeah, it was always the plan. I had this vision of a detective that would, move around, but it turned out to be a duo that moves around. So things did change, but I did have a plan because there's so many interesting things that happened in the 1890s, pivotal things, fascinating things, and many real world unexplained events
Sure.
that don't make sense unless you look at the context. But I take other risks as well. In Murder No Bombay, I worked with a single narrator telling his stories, a first person point of view. And there's some interleaving adventures. Captain Jim has a habit of going off on these adventures, and usually to, always to further the investigation, but sometimes it's a little circuitous. Um, However, in peril at the exposition, I actually have two narrators, and they start out mostly it's Diana's voice, I think, for the first 100 pages. But as the book proceeds, it escalates the interleaving chapters, one with Diana's voice, the other with Captain Jim's voice. They escalate towards the end. And I think in a way it actually increases the suspense because there's no plot armor, right? When you have one narrator, that narrator has to be there at the end. But when you have two, there is just the slightest chance that one narrator may not survive to the end. So it actually eliminates the plot armor, and as a result, increases the suspense and really the fear element.
Interesting. I can't wait till I start the second book. But before we go any further with your actual writing, Nev, just one quick question: why did you choose the pen name that you did? I'm always fascinated with writers where they choose a pen name and they go with that. Unlike some writers, you're not cloaked in secrecy. You're not going to kill me here for revealing your secret identity. But
No.
why the pen name?
Yeah. So my legal name is a little hard to pronounce, and also it's written down. It is too foreign, frankly. And I did in my professional career realize that having a very foreign name distanced me from uh, whoever, an interviewer, colleagues. So I didn't want that for my writing career. I wanted something that was short and easy and accessible. Um, so I went back to the writers that really impressed me tremendously, and there were a lot in my childhood or my youth. As a teenager, I read Neville Shute. He's got some marvelous books. Trustee from the Tool Room is one that sticks in my mind. A Town Like Alice and After the Bomb are other marvelous books. He wrote 24 novels in all, and I mean, almost all of them are fabulous. So I kept Nev as a tribute to Neville Shute. And then Jo March is a character in Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. Of course, Jo March wanted to earn her living as a writer,
Oh,
as I did. So it worked well to have Nev March give a tribute to both those, famous characters or authors. It's also very similar to my real name, so it worked out well.
I can relate to what you're saying about having a different sounding name. Trust me, growing up with the name Con in Brooklyn in the 1960s was not easy, but I digress. Um, what drew you to mysteries and thrillers for your writing, as opposed to other forms of literature?
Sure. So, Con, I love historical novels. I, read um, Conan Doyle actually wrote more historical short stories than he did Sherlock Holmes short stories. But I've read tons of other writers as well and was particularly interested in those novels that explained something, maybe a mystery or a puzzle or a contradiction from the past. So my early writings before Murder in Old Bombay were all four manuscripts were historical in nature. Um, but I'm more fascinated by difficult situations that are sort of quandaries or situations that tell you about someone approaching a boundary, choices that they have to make when they are, in a lose-lose or a win-win situation. um, I guess the suspense and emotion that really go along with high stakes. And then, of course, there's this idea that maybe these little decisions that we make really matter. Can the choices of one person change the course of history? We found that historically that is true. And I'll name two people that you can look up at your leisure. Stanislav Petrov and Vasily Arkhipov, both Russians. Don't worry about the spellings. Just look up the men who saved the world, and they will both come up. These are Russians that were just doing their jobs, but ended up saving the world from nuclear war. So yeah, those single decisions.
Yeah, those were scary stories. I'm familiar with both of them, and a lot of people don't realize how close we came in the 1960s and the 1980s to having a nuclear exchange.
And we were saved because, not because of anything we did, but because, two people essentially did the right thing. We were just incredibly lucky.
Yeah, no, we were. We were. And I agree with you. I think that, one individual can affect history well beyond what we would think. Normally we think in terms of nations, armies, movements, re religions, but every once in a while, especially these days where the toys are so much more dangerous, one individual can make a big difference. So, where did the idea of setting your books in the Raj come from?
Yeah, so there's a couple of stories here, Con. I guess the first is really Winter in Old Bombay came from a real life tragedy. And if you want the real life story, you have to look up the Rajabai Tower tragedy, or even the Rajabai Tower mystery. That was the title of my manuscript, and it's an unsolved mystery from 1891, where two women in my community died. They fell from the top of the university clock tower in broad daylight. And a lot of the details in my book, the details of the crime, are exactly from that original tragedy. There were, someone was accused of the crime, there were trials and so on. There were petitions to reopen the case, but no one was ever convicted of the original crime because of lack of evidence. And I think it had to do with the way that policing in India historically came from the army. It was really just about controlling the masses, not so much about solving individual crimes or trying to get justice for the Indian community. It might have been different if the women who had died were English, but that crime was never solved. That the tragedy was never explained, and so it sat within our community. And this book is my attempt to try and solve the crime, even though it's been 130 years. The second story is really about a family secret. I ended up becoming family historian, and I got two copies of this book that was published in the 1950s, right after India got independence. But although it was published at that time, it was a Gujarati language poem. It's the entire book is in couplets that have the rhythm and so on in ancient Gujarati. And I'm not very good at reading it, reading Gujarati, certainly not 150-year-old Gujarati. The manuscript had been written in the 1850s and 1860s and was written by my ancestor, my grandmother's grandfather. So, we had this in our family, that two books that nobody could read, basically. I had them translated, and it was quite eye-opening that they told a different story of the mutiny of 1857 than the official account. And so, of course, here I have a personal document by my ancestor that contradicts something that is official version of the mutiny, the Sepoy mutiny of 1857. I had to use that. It was just irresistible. My ancestor was a cook in the English army, and he kind of wrote this as an autobiography, but also a little bit as a confession. So it's quite interesting, and I wove that into Murder in Old Bombay.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. How difficult is it to do the research for these periods? I mean, doing research for a novel, even in contemporary times, can be hard enough. but you're going back 100 plus years. Um, Different language, customs. How hard is that?
Yeah, quite hard. So some places don't change so much. They're sort of caught in time. Little towns that we visited when I was growing up or as a teenager, um, you still traveled by Tonga. You still had people on bicycles. Bicycle rickshaws still existed, and there was a sense of the places having been the same for maybe a couple of centuries even. So a lot of the feel, the aesthetics that are in modern Old Bombay are really pulled from my memory. But the internet now is marvelous. You can get maps of places. So although I haven't actually been to Karachi, I was able to identify what the fortress looked like, what the roads, the streets look like. They curve around. There are wells. And then I asked somebody who grew up there, um, what color is the soil? And because I had written in the book that the soil of Karachi, the red dust of Karachi is a phrase that's in there. And she said, well, it's brownish red. And I'm going, okay, this is weird. I have not been there. I should not know that. But, it is, it's not that far. Bombay is still, part of the same continent, I guess. And when she read the book, this lady called me back and said, I can't believe it. You got the feel of the place. So it's quite charming that, to be able to recreate that for somebody who actually grew up there. Um, I, have visited tons of websites like genealogy posts. You get these little tidbits of information that just make the place come alive. Chicago was harder to research. Even though the World's Fair is very well documented, the city of Chicago, it basically raised entire ethnic neighborhoods to create today's massive highway system. So those little neighborhoods no longer exist, but the maps, the old maps exist, and they'll tell you which blocks were occupied by which ethnicities. So it's really quite beautiful the way that detail comes together. Then there are wonderful books like Chicago: The History of Its Reputation by Lloyd Lewis and Henry Justin Smith. These guys had so much character in the way they wrote this nonfiction book. And of course, they love Chicago, so they praise it to the moon. But just the people, the personalities that come off that page, those pages are just delightful. So I wove a lot of that into the book on Chicago, Peril at the Exposition. There are actually videos from the 1890s where you can see what people wore. The textbook will tell you that the ladies wore bustles, which is kind of a lobster tail-like shape at the back in the backside. But the videos that I have from that time do not have the bustles. They already had started moving towards the look and the profile, the clothing profile of the 1900s. So, those kinds of things gave me lots of fodder, lots of opportunity to explore. Research can be a bit of a ditch, it can be a deep hole.
Yes. Now, many writers have told me that, when they go down that rabbit hole, they just keep going and they got to really pull up hard. Otherwise, they would still be researching. And I can imagine, trying to research a city like Chicago is difficult considering how every once in a while they burn it down. Um, so, you've talked about for your books, uh, your family history, your interest in these periods and these people. But what was the inspiration? What was the spark that caused you to sit down, put pen to paper, fingers to keyboard, whatever your tool of choice is, and say, I've got an idea?
Huh. This is a good one. So I had written 4 historical manuscripts before, different places. All of them are different time periods. But the fact that they're all historical should tell you something about me. Is that's sort of where I go. But I'll tell you the biggest motivation I want to say came from a biography that I read of Adi Godrej. Adisha Godrej was the husband who lost his wife when she fell from that clock tower. The older girl was his wife. She was 20 years old. And I read his biography. It was quite astonishing because how does a 22-year-old law student uh, just recover from a tragedy like this? And he turned not only turned his life around, but he became a serial entrepreneur. He founded 17 different industries, and what he's left is today one of India's largest conglomerates, the Godrej Foundation. So he didn't have any children. The descendants today are all from his brother, but he fascinated me. Just the idea of resilience and then going on to make such enormous contributions to India, to the entire country. But it's that personal tragedy to be able to overcome that. He never remarried, so that has a little bit of a love story to it as well. And that I think gave me a sense of, okay, if somebody this intelligent, this collected, even though he's so young, had lost his bride in this very public but very mysterious way, what would he do? And I thought, well, maybe he would hire a detective because the police have given up, but he hasn't. And then what kind of detective would he hire? Well, there were a lot of British officers, maybe, coming off of the roles looking for civilian jobs. And I thought maybe somebody who's young but has been injured and therefore can't go on, maybe disillusioned with the army. And then I guess a pivotal decision for me was to make him Anglo-Indian, because the moment I did that for a simple reason. I wanted him to be able to walk in both worlds, in the society ballrooms as well as in the real India, the grungier part of India, the villages, the mountaintops, the poorer side of India. Um, so I made him Anglo-Indian for that reason. But the moment I did that, I introduced race. And I think I realized that I had a lot to say about race, about the people in between, the people that don't get accepted. And in many ways, I'm well suited to address that for a couple of reasons. My community, the Parsis, are sort of the in-between people, neither completely Indian nor completely uh, Western. So we're in between or both. And then I'm an immigrant. So here again, even though I've assimilated into the American culture, I'm an immigrant. So I have a lot of the old world beliefs and behaviors, and also, you know, accepting and understanding of my new home. So I realized I had a lot to say about race. And so that added a layer of depth into the mystery that I did not plan. It was intended to be a straight mystery. It was not intended to have these multiple layers that the book ended up with.
Well, I think it's those multiple layers that make your writing so attractive, so that informs the power of your books. You're not sugarcoating anything. Um, especially in the late 19th century, people of mixed race had a tough time. Even tougher than today, if you can believe it. Um, so yeah, I can see where that adds to your book, and it adds to the reality of the story. It's not you're not passing over anything. You're taking the issue. You're taking the bull by the horns.
It was, in the same at the same token, it was not intended to be preachy. I hope it does not come across that way. It is a very insider perspective in a way, because Captain Jim is part of the culture. So when he sees things happening, unfairness to women, he makes a mental note like, huh, that doesn't sound right. But because he's part of the culture, he's not a crusader. He's not somebody that says, I'm going to change everything, because this is the society he's in, and as we are, we learn to accept certain things as normal. But because he is excluded in so many ways, he also offers the observation from the outsider point of view. And I think that offers the reader a way to contemplate and consider societal norms. You know, some of them are old, some of them are still existing, and to question even our own beliefs, because many of these are still around. Do
Well,
we, should
it
we do this?
challenges us.
You go ahead.
Sorry, it challenges us.
Mhm.
It,
It
it challenge,
challenges us. That was the intention. Absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
and it's we look back from the 21st century many times at events in the past, but if we were born and raised in those times, we would probably accept a lot of what was going on around us because that's the way it was. There are people who stand up and say, no, this is wrong. Abolitionists, the suffragettes, the people in India who decided that India should be a free country and not part of somebody's colonial empire. But they're more the exception than the rule, at least in the beginning, until other people, start having that aha moment, as you put it, and realize that maybe things should change.
Yeah, I agree. So this is why, since I was writing about the 1890s, so Mahatma Gandhi had just about gone to South Africa as a young man, as a lawyer, and then he was in South Africa for 20 years. He didn't come back till I think 1900s, 1920. So although there were some rumblings of independence, that's not a big part of this story. If anything, it's a little bit of a feminist story, even because there's aspects of how women are treated that come up at every juncture. And I realized that Captain Jim interacts with a Rani, with a queen. And then at one point he befriends a waif, like a beggar woman, a beggar girl, actually, a child that he takes under his wing. And so he's interacting with all these people. Of course, there's Diana, who's the privileged sort of princessy character from his client's sister, basically, who also is facing restrictions just because she's a woman, and so he's interacting with all these different people uh, who who are part of the culture, part of the milieu, and each of them is has a different aspect, a different kind of restriction, a different kind of problem that they are facing. So in many ways, even though he's not by any means trying to force any of his opinions on anybody, yet the reader gets a chance to view that culture through that lens, sit on his shoulder and take a look at this is what's happening. Does that feel right to you? Is this, yeah, and a lot of that still goes on. So in many ways, it is a feminist book, even though it's written from a 30-year-old man's point of view.
Well, that just points to the strength of your writing. And stepping back from your books for a moment, Nev, do you have a favorite mystery thriller author?
Oh, I have several. I have to tell you, they run the gamut. So Joanna Schaffhausen she writes these incredibly gripping, delightful books of FBI agent duo, and they're quite terrifying, actually. I can't seem to put them down. Susan Cox writes delightful, funny mysteries set in San Francisco. It's just wonderful atmosphere, but also very droll. She has a British background, I think, British transplant, and I believe she's going back to England. Just that the sense of humor is delightful. Julie McElwain, another favorite of mine, she does time travel mysteries where she has an FBI agent who has somehow been sucked into the 1700s, England in the 1700s. And of course, now you have a modern woman's point of view, the lens. She's trying to struggle through the societal constraints and norms of behavior of the time. So it's just delightful. And I burst out laughing sometimes, and I'm just terrified for her the rest of the time. Of course, in terms of books on India, one can't possibly not mention Sujata Massey and Abir Mukherjee, Wasim Khan as well. Just wonderful writers that open up a window into the past. The two, Sujata Massey and Abhir Mukherjee, write in the 1920s, I want to say. So they have a little bit more of the theme of independence and um, the intrigue of the different factions. Really good stuff. But they bring the history of the time to life. So, of course, I love it.
Good, good. Now, Nev, let's also talk about the crime writers of color and how it's helped you. I also want to thank Kelly Garrett of the Crime Writers of Color who introduced me to you first. But please tell us about the CWOC.
Sure. This is a, it started out as a small group and it has just really grown, and I'm delighted. It's been a very supportive group. The Crime Writers of Color, really, I joined because it was a space to share information, promotional leads, to help other writers. You get to know so much. First, I treated it as a bulletin board, just reading it, just absorbing what do people care about. And then I realized that this is actually community, and it's a very nurturing community. So I appreciate that opportunity to participate and to share information, also comment on what people are going through. And it's supportive because I realize a lot of what I'm going through, others have experienced, and then we can, um, feel that collegial atmosphere together. Kelly Garrett actually and Sujata Massey had invited me, and I had no idea that this group even existed. I was aware of Mystery Writers of America, which is all mystery writers, but here you have crime writers, particularly within marginalized communities. And I think there's just a lot of barriers to entry for writers in general, but certainly for writers of color. So anything that I could do to help other writers um, through that, through the difficulties I faced, goodness, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, we've had several writers on from Crime Writers of Color this year, and all of them have made similar comments to you about how it's helped them come together with other people. Because being a writer is difficult enough, let alone being from a marginalized community, as you said. How did you become aware of Crime Writers of Color? I asked this question because for our audience, I'm sure there are people out there who would like to join or become involved. And how did you get connected with them?
I actually got an invitation, an email from Kelly, who had heard me present at some other event. Maybe it was Mystery Writers of America or elsewhere. And so she approached me and said, "Hey, here's this group, and are you aware?" The way that we connect is through groups.io. So, not to get technical on you here, I had been part of Yahoo groups in the past, just again, a way to connect with writing groups without actually having to travel there. But the Crime Writers of Color, although the what it's sitting on is different, groups.io is different, but the format and um, the practice, the way of communicating felt like it leveraged the skills that I had from the Yahoo groups. And then, of course, it's when you sign up for something, I think the more you put in, the more you get out of it. And that's true for almost anything, classes or webinars or books. The more you put in, the more you get out of it. So I volunteered for a little project to create an events page, and ended up interacting with a couple of the other ladies and realized that, wow, this is really fun because you work together and you achieve it. You get, use your business skills to get something done, but you also have this sense of friendship and this sense of partnering and building something together. So that's really very it feels very meaningful and very rewarding to me.
Good, good. And thank you for contributing. It's always good when writers reach out and help other writers who are trying to get started. It is a very difficult business. Nev, can we find you in any of your characters?
Oh gosh, and many of them, I want to say all of them, but I'm trying to think. Um, I'll tell you, parts of me, parts of people I loved are in those characters. Many of the people who are represented there have passed on, but they are in my memory in such a way that when I'm writing the character, uh, they pop into being so complete. It surprises me, and I realize where it's coming from. So, funny thing is, in Murder No Bombay, Captain Jim realizes that he's disguising himself for various projects, for various little adventures, but the disguises he uses, right? He's memorializing his dead friends in those disguises. He basically becomes them for that adventure, and it's easy for him because he knows them so well. So he adopts their mannerisms, he adopts their clothing, and he is successful. But it's also a tribute to them because he misses them so much. And it took me a while to realize I was doing that. I was doing exactly that in my characters. Barjor is a real person, passed away now. A wonderful, wonderful man called Firs Wakil. That I kind of crafted the character of Barjor very much around him. Captain Jim has aspects of an uncle who passed. Um, um, you know, he was a colonel in the Indian Army, and he was in the North African campaign in World War II. And
Wow.
yeah, and I used to visit them in Belgaum very often as a teen. I'd go without my parents. So, you're going to your own aunt's house, you can travel and you can go by yourself, which is everywhere else, my parents and my family would be around. But I got to interact with this couple very closely and realized that he's a very strong man, but he was damaged. He was incredibly um, affected with PTSD. Of course, we didn't have names for this. I'm talking about the 80s, 70s and 80s. We didn't know what to call it. But I witnessed a couple of things that just shocked me and, didn't diminish my love for him at all, but just made me realize how deep people are and that appearances can be so deceptive. So Captain Jim is this tough guy. He's a boxer. He's a soldier. He's got the chops, but inside, inside he's hurting. And so that poignancy, I think, stayed with me because of what I had seen within my uncle and his experiences. So yeah, a lot of me is within them, but a lot of the people that I was very close to made it into the characters.
Do you have a favorite character? And I know that's like asking a parent if they have a favorite child, but I'm gonna ask it anyway.
Yeah, it's hard. I have many favorite characters. Each book brings a couple of minor characters into the spotlight in unexpected ways. I start out with, what role they have to play, and I write out everything in detailed spreadsheets. I mean, I worked 20 years in business analysis, so everything I do has that productive aspect to it. So I have an intention for the character, and then the characters don't listen, right? So I kind of have to wing it at that point. Um, in Peril of the Exposition, there's this character called Abigail that appears very early in the book, and she was just intended to be a guide, somebody who would know Chicago a little bit, be able to help Diana because she is so naive and so new to the country. I thought it would be incredible, actually, not credible, for her to be solving a mystery when she's such a raw immigrant. And how would she negotiate, navigate the social norms of the time, right? So I had to have this guide character. But then Abigail just had these deep stories of her own. She kept surprising me and destroying my carefully thought out plot. So everything was going to tick and tie so nicely, except she kept doing these unusual things, and I realized that there were reasons for that. And when that happens, you take it as a gift. You don't try to rein it in. I just write it. If a character is doing strange things, unusual things, has their own agenda, I write it, and I try to figure it out as I'm writing it. Sometimes a lot of it may get cut because my revisions are a nightmare. I have to bring it all together again at the end. But the drafting to me is not the place to worry about trying to stay on the plot that I had envisioned. Because I let it grow, it's more organic. It may feel when you're reading it even that it's going off in tangents, like where is this going? But there's a point to it because I bring it all back together again, and it fleshes out the book. It makes it richer, and it goes off, um, into interesting areas and brings more complexity perhaps, but also more of a holistic view because I cannot imagine that a investigator would just be entirely so focused on their work or their assignment that they would be blind to the other things around them. Uh, Especially someone who is trained and who is motivated to observe is unlikely to be clueless and blind to social things that are going on. So I do have those elements brought in, and they're part of the story because they move the plot along. They are intrinsic. One of the final revisions that I do is I go through and say, all right, every chapter, this is what's happening. Could the story survive without it? And if the answer is yes, very often that gets cut. But the way these elements bloom in the story is that then I cannot cut that part out. The whole story would fall down. It would not make sense at the end if I cut it out. So even though these detours happen organically, I treat them as a gift and just try to work with them. And so, yeah, Abigail is a huge detour for the 1890s to have a cross dressing character. That was not my intention, but she was so interesting. And I think there's so much more to say about her that at some point I've got to bring her back. And Tobias similarly has um, so much pathos. So he's an older black man. He's somebody that Diana trusts. And so she asks for him to come along as her assistant, even though he's just a porter. He's not an investigator or an operative, but she's somebody he trusts. And of course, she gets him into trouble because she doesn't know what she's doing, especially in the beginning. But the character was so endearing to me that I just had to keep him in there, and he ends up becoming very pivotal to the story. So, if you say, who are your favorite characters? Of course, Captain Jim and Diana are favorites because they keep talking to me even when we're not writing. They talk to me all the time, sometimes to each other. And for me, it's just joy to have their company in a sense, their perspective and their company. And at the same time, there are these other characters that they come across and engage with and are sometimes, emotionally connected to. In the first book, it was Chutki. She was this waif, this childlike beggar girl that Captain Jim ends up taking care of. And again, she was so vivid. There are scenes that just were heartbreaking, so beautifully drawn because she was so real. Similarly, the Barjor character, the mother character, Mrs. Framji, there are little pieces there that I would not change, for all the money in the world. There are people in my head, and hopefully they become as real to readers as they are going through the book.
Fascinating. I've met many writers who have the same experience that you've had, where the characters begin to write their own stories and they let it go and they build it into the story. It must be an incredibly powerful experience when that happens in your writing. Now, how difficult is it for writers to get started today, Nev? What's your
Oh,
experience been?
yeah, I wish I could be more upbeat about this. It is difficult. It is difficult to break into traditional publishing, and that this is the reason why so many people go to self-publishing. But there's two levels I should talk about here. The one is that writing an entire novel is in itself difficult to sustain, but it, the the difficulty is not just that one needs an idea for a story. A lot of people have good, compelling ideas for the stories in the, that they want to tell. The difficulty is in writing it in an engaging way. So learning to write well, to learn the craft of writing. I think this is something that maybe writers do not give enough attention to in the novice phase. I think once you turn into an intermediate writer, you realize, oh my God, there's all this stuff that I really need to learn and master. And this is why I teach writing, because I decide this is an area that I need to do better at. And so I teach a course on that. It's just 5 or 10 weeks, but by doing that, I really need to focus and I look at other books and how they've achieved it. So learning the craft of writing is essential, because without that, all that work is, I don't want to say wasted, it's never wasted, but the work is going to languish. It is not going to get the audience and the reception that it deserves if the craft of writing is weak. Um, so there's that enormous hurdle. Um, but it is conquerable. It is achievable through self-education. There are tons of courses as well, and if you come across a good teacher, a good mentor, God bless you. I taught myself in many ways. I picked up many books on writing. I did every exercise, and kept writing. And the best part for me was the feedback I got from my writing group, because that's where you really learn. The second part is the breaking into publishing. And for that, a writer needs enormous persistence. So I do hear stories of writers getting six figures, where they have 3 and 4 bids and there's competition going for their manuscript. God bless them, and I'm very happy for them. But I treat them as those as fairy tales. Okay, if it happens, wonderful. But it's like winning the lottery.
Yeah.
Uh, in my case, it was much more difficult. I had pitched 116 agents before I heard back. 2 agents wrote back and said, all right, would like to read the manuscript. And then one of those agents, Jill Grosjean, accepted me to represent me. And she's been a fantastic fit for me. But, 116 queries, that's that many people saying no. It is not for the faint of heart.
No.
And of course, yeah, I was very fortunate to win that contest, the Mystery Writers of America contest. There's 600 submissions every year, and they don't even award that, um, the award every year. So it is hard to break in, I will admit, but it can be done.
Oh, you did it, and congratulations there. What effect do you think technology is going to have on publishing in the future, in your opinion? Things like Amazon, the internet, ebooks.
Yeah, so there's the lines between books, uh, movies, TV series, and even video games. Those lines are starting to blur. I think everything maybe starts from a script or a book, but how we perceive it, how we receive it, as a reader or a viewer or an audience, that maybe is changing. So I'll tell you, the technology has already enormously changed the publishing world, because you have over 1 million self-published books that come out, new titles that come out every year. And just the sheer volume is enormous. In many ways, it gives people an opportunity to see their book in their hands, feel that and have that satisfaction. But unfortunately, also, I think leads to some disappointment, because self-published writers then need to become full-time marketers. And I don't know a lot of writers that are ready for that, or know how to do that. So it's a lot of work to market one's own writing.
True.
But it
Very
gives
true.
you an outlet, and it's the first step. So I always recommend when people do this, like, yes, go for it. Self-publish, you get the satisfaction, you start learning to promote and publish, but then write the next book, and you know what? Pitch it to the traditional publishers. Get that footprint. They have an enormous footprint with distribution. And your second book, and your third book, and your fifth book, and your nth book, get it out there to them. Get that footprint. if that's a route, I'm very hopeful for that will work. But I do think that technology is also evolving. So crowdfunding, is this idea that's been used for many, many things. I'm thinking at some point, crowdfunding a book, turning it into a movie or a TV script, that is going to happen a lot more. It might be fun. I think when people have more time, they read more, travel more, explore more. But certainly, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we want stories. We want them in our living rooms. We want them to come to us. So, if you're building a book or a series one chapter at a time and crowdfunding it or crowdsourcing it, bringing in input and information and reactions in real time, hey, that might become a thing.
That's very interesting. It's a very interesting observation. I haven't heard that one before.
I'll tell you one more that occurred to me, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but it seems like it could. So my son he plays Dungeons and Dragons, D&D,
Hmm.
and he's writing what he calls a campaign story. So he's setting up the game essentially for a group of his friends, and it's a little like building a novel with multiple streams. You have multiple things that can happen, multiple locations, multiple clues that you're planting, and so he's doing this as it's really an interactive novel. It's
Hmm.
a novel that you're getting to, yeah, you choose, and that ends up changing the course of the story. So now add on to that virtual reality, okay? Because
Hmm.
it's a technology that already exists, it's entertainment. It just hasn't been connected yet to a lot of stories. I don't know that it is connected to stories. It could be a new form of entertainment. We're talking about a game changer, just like when TV came into our living rooms. There were movies, people had recorded, but TV then was a game changer. At this point, virtual reality story would be like walking in a novel. And so you'd use a script, you'd use animation, you'd use user input. So it brings together a whole bunch of disparate pieces into something quite new.
Oh, welcome to Second Life then. Can you tell us about any future projects that you're working on right now? Are we going to see more of the Raj from you?
Yes, possibly. Right now, I'm finishing book three, which is a locked room mystery set on a steamship in 1894. So this is, the era of ocean travel. It's also got a time-bound element to it because the mystery must be solved before they dock. So it has that element of a ticking clock, and the stakes are very high. So there's that. Um, Also the sense that the murderer cannot leave the ship, so they are still around. I'm having fun with this. But then after this, I have possibly three more adventures for Captain Jim and Diana. You see, the novels I write have all these layers, and one of those layers is the relationship between the two primary characters, and that relationship constantly evolves. So when you're reading a romance, it ends with a couple coming together, and they're whatever the hurdle is has been overcome, and they are now together. But that's really the start of the story, not the ending of the story. How do they balance their self and their couplehood? How do they manage conflict? You remember you're talking about 1890s, there's going to be massive amounts of conflict just from the gender roles. Goodness, how do they complement each other's skills and knowledge? How do they change or refuse to change? So each story has one aspect of their relationship that they're struggling with while they're trying to solve something else, something very real, very pressing that could potentially, very dangerous that could potentially kill one or the other. So those
Let's
are interesting ways to do it. Yeah, and
let's,
I'll
let's hope not.
so there's more to come for Captain Jim and Diana. And I noodle, I journal all the time. So again, because they, talk in asides and to me, I now have the first lines of maybe two or even three new books. I have no idea. I have only the vaguest idea of what those books are about, but this is how they grow. The seeds are there. So we'll see.
Good. I look I look forward to seeing your future books. And last question before we go: are you going to be attending any writers' conferences this year or in the near future?
So I am not. I'm not going to BarcherCon this year. I would have loved to, but I will actually be in India on a visit very shortly. So
Okay.
next year I am signed up for an online conference that's held by Sisters in Crime, one of the chapters, and they host Murderous March. Well, my
Ooh.
name is Nev March. I have to be there.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Well, look, Nev, I want to thank you for joining us. It's been a lot of fun talking with you. I know I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has as well. And I'd just like to thank the audience for joining us today. And also, this has been our seventh broadcast for this year. Uh, I'm also going to be announcing today that the Mystery Hour is going on a hiatus for a while. We need a break to rethink, retool, and deal with the changing world around us as it's slowly recovering from the pandemic. But we shall return. I'm just not sure when yet. Thank you for listening and joining with us.
You.
I
Thank
wish
you,
you much
Con. Thank you
happiness.
so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. I wish everyone much happiness and success in your endeavors. Stay safe, and especially I want to give a shout out to Becky Hansen and Isabel Charon for their continued support during the last 2 years that we've been on. So our live broadcast is ending now, but if any of you would like to work with us in the future as we start getting ready to come back, please contact me at conpsweeney@semeti.com if you have any suggestions or ideas or you'd like to help us, and would like to join our stage crew, because putting on a show like this isn't easy. Thank you very much and have a great day.